people focus a lot on probiotics would be a really good example, right? And probiotics they're great. Like, and for some people they really work, and for other people they don't, and that's okay. But what I think about, if we were to say our microbiome were just bacteria, which is so not true.
And I was surprised when I came into naturopathic medicine is that it has still that tendency to attack and kill antimicrobials, antiparasitics, even in the herbal world. And a lot of the naturopaths that have trained many years ago are still doing that approach. Kill, rebuild, kill, rebuild, kill, rebuild. And it just doesn't work.
Serotonin, one of the biggest producers of serotonin, comes from our gut. It comes from our gut microbes. We've got precursors to dopamine that come from the gut, right? When we talk about those postbiotic signaling molecules, dopamine's a fun, feel-good neurotransmitter. I mean, a lot of people take drugs to get dopamine splurges, it's woo.
Welcome back to the smarternotharder podcast, your home for 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. I'm your host for today, Jodi Duval. So today we are venturing into the very intricate world of the human microbiome. And joining us is none other than Dr. Piper Dobner, who has an amazing, fun chat about all things shit. So she's a renowned expert in the field of naturopathic medicine with a deep dive into the postbiotic frontier. But she brings to the table a wealth of knowledge from work with Thaena, her company, and is pioneering the process of postbiotics. And it really does promise a new and fun era with microbiome health. So we did have a lot of fun talking about poo and all things relative. And we went beyond the common knowledge of probiotics and exploring this advanced microbiome dynamics, the cutting edge research in microbiome communication or microbial communication, and the impact of postbiotics on systemic health. So Piper will shed light on the personalized approach to microbiome management and the potential of microbiome research in disease prevention and mental health. And she gives us some really beautiful tips for being smarter, not harder with your microbiome. So if you're ready to expand this understanding and the potential of postbiotics in transforming health outcomes, stay tuned as we dive into this fascinating conversation. Without further ado, Dr. Piper. Welcome, Piper. It's an absolute pleasure that I get to talk to you today about crapsules. I just had to say that straight up.
100%. I'm more than okay with you saying that. Thank you for having me.
And to hear all about you and your amazing journey through, obviously, naturopathic medicine, fecal transplants, and your amazing company, Thaena.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. So where do I start? With the company?
How did you get into poo?
How did I get into poo? That's a really good question. I often joke with people that it was a bit of a destiny line, because I have been known as poop or pooper most of my life, which I didn't think was a weird thing until my third grade best friend called the house during landline days and asked for me. She called and was like, "Is Piper there?" And my mom answered the phone. She's like, "Oh yeah, sure," and put the phone down. And she's like, "Poopy," because that was one of my nicknames growing up. Not necessarily because I pooped myself all the time. It was just because when I was a baby, my name's Piper, right? So Piper and Pooper are very interchangeable. And if I had a poopy diaper, she would say poopy drawers, like Poopy's got some poopy drawers. And so it just kind of stuck. And then I got on the phone after my mom had put it down, and my friend was just cracking up. And from there forward, basically everybody from elementary school on knew me as Poop or Pooper. And it's just been part of my life. But to fast forward into the scientific side of poop, I would say that I got into fecal transplant and stool as a therapy when I was in my first year of medical school. And one of the things that really led me into this field was actually a dear friend of mine. I was not doing great in microbiology. It was a very intensive rote memorization course, and I'm very much so a big picture kind of person. And so the name of this bug, whether it's gram negative or gram positive, and was it associated with this disease or that disease, there were just so many. And the scientific names for bugs were ones that I just had a really hard time assimilating into my brain. And so I got a mentor, or a tutor, and she's now a dear friend of mine, Molly Isabella. And she was like, we were sitting there studying for a test, and she was just like, I was like, I hate microbiology. And she's like, this isn't microbiology. She's like, let me introduce you to the world of microbiology. And so she at the time had been working with Mark Davis and Carmen Campbell out of Portland, Oregon, who were two naturopathic doctors in the city who were working in fecal transplant. And she introduced me to Carmen, and I started working with Carmen while I was a student. So my first year of school, I started working with her. And um, from there, I just being in a clinical setting as a student, watching patients receive fecal transplant as a therapy, it was one of the first times, and you know this because you're a naturopath, a lot of our therapies take time, right? Like we give a herbal remedy or we give a tincture or we tell somebody to drink tea for a few months and come back and check in with us and see if we've kind of changed the energetics or shifted the physiologic picture of the patient. And with fecal transplant, it was like these patients would come in with C. diff, not responding to standard therapy, because in the States, that's what we can legally use fecal transplant for. And they'd be passing 15 to 20 plus stools in a day. Some of them were severely dehydrated. Some of them were presenting to the hospital for dehydration. We'd give them fecal transplant, and the next day they'd have a solid stool. So it was like within 24 hours, their whole system changed. And that was a world that I was like, no freaking way. Like, we know the gut is the center of health as naturopathic doctors. Like, we absolutely know that. But to see it happen in real time, in real life, was such a cool experience. And then from there, it became something that I continued to study. And then my business partner for flora medicine had approached me in my last year of school because I was in the research program as well. And she was like, do you want to start a stool bank? And I was like, let's do this. Like, let's get into it. So that's the brief intro to my journey in the world of fecal therapy.
To think that hating microbiology to be into the field of microbiology, it's incredible, isn't it? It just shows for the education part is that, just finding the motivational point, the love point for anything, and you can learn whatever you need to from that once you actually grasp the concept or grasp the love for that topic. And and as you have done, it's just incredible. So for the audience, and I know a lot of the audience will know already about the microbiome, but I want to bring something a little bit different to them. And obviously, we are talking about crapsules and fecal transplants today, which is very different. And I think the more I talk to people, the more people actually still don't know about this, particularly in Australia. It's not, there is a few centres that will do this, but it's not well known within the naturopathic community whatsoever. And even within the US, I believe, still. And because of the short
Right.
ability for the treatment, there's not much outcome in terms of what we can treat with them. Like you said, C. diff. But what I've read and what I've seen, there is huge outcomes for so many other conditions and so many other parts of disease states that people can heal from. So, firstly, let's sort of go through what what is the lesser known parts of the microbiome that really impacts human physiology. What do we not really think about? Like we know gut is the center of health, it's the immune system, it's all these other parts. But what do you think is the understated part of the microbiome that we really need to be knowing or looking up to?
Oh my gosh, where to begin? I think so much is understated. I'm like, oh gosh. I think that one of the things that we've really glommed onto in the last decade, 2 decades of microbiome research and gut health is the concept of living microbes, right? Like we need to have a bunch of different living microbes. A lot of people focus a lot on probiotics would be a really good example, right? And probiotics they're great. Like, and for some people they really work, and for other people they don't, and that's okay. But what I think about, if we were to say our microbiome were just bacteria, which is so not true. Like there are so many other organisms inside of the microbiome, but if we simplified it to just bacteria, because bacteria do make up the larger proportion of the microbiome. So if we were looking at that and we say we've got 1,000 different species, and of those 1,000 different species, 20%, so maybe 200, 20 to 40%, 200 to 400 are ones that can survive in oxygen. So they're aerobic or they're aerobic organisms. Those are the ones that we're self-selecting from to make a 1 to 10 strain probiotic supplement to give to somebody and say, we're going to completely reestablish your microbiome by giving you this small number of bugs. I think that severely underestimates the importance of all of the other critters inside of the microbiome. I think that one of the things that we devalue about the biome is that our microbes need us to be healthy. They want us to be healthy. And when we're feeding them and we're giving them a fuel source, which is fibers, right? Like different polyphenolic compounds. So when we're eating vegetables, when we're eating different colorful fruits, vegetables, fibrous materials, we're sending all of that material down the pipe to then feed these microbes. And these microbes eat and they gobble it up and then they poop. And so, yeah, they're part of our poop, but they're also pooping. And what they're pooping out are small molecules that are actually talking to our body. And so the concept of postbiotics, which is really where our company has maintained its focus, is there are these small signaling molecules that are speaking to the rest of the body. So I always talk about, postbiotics are kind of like how the microbiome speaks. It's how it talks to us. There's a massive mucus layer that if you're, a healthy human, you've got a nice thick mucosal layer that is separating the microbes from the internal aspect of your body. So we've got this tube of like deliciously rich microbial organisms that live inside, but they're eating and consuming all of the things that we can't break down. Like we can't break down cellulose, right? Like if we ate some sort of a plant material that's got cellulose inside of it, we're not breaking that down, but the bugs are. And they love that. Like they love it. They gobble it up. And then they're creating compounds that actually talk to our body. And some of those compounds are things that we take as supplements. So, like B vitamins come from our microbiome. So, if we're eating enough of a plant based diet with enough fibrous vegetable material, do we really need to take a supplement or can you be getting it from a nice, rich biome of microbes that are going to provide that for you? K2 is another one that comes through from the microbiome. There's a bunch of, so all the short chain fatty acids are made by the microbiome. These are very anti inflammatory molecules. So when we talk about things like autoimmunity, for example, autoimmunity is an over exaggerated response of the immune system that's not turning off. Like it's turned on and it's been switched on and it just doesn't have the appropriate off switch to turn it off. And I think that sometimes that could be because so many of our therapeutics that we focus on in the world of medicine as a whole, I don't want to talk about naturopaths necessarily, but like as a whole, conventional medicine, all medical therapeutics, it's like, okay, you don't feel well, let's give you an antibiotic. You don't feel well, here's an antiviral. You don't feel well, here's an anti kill whatever the thing is that they're trying to kill. And we have viruses, we've got fungus, we've got bacteria, we've got amoebas, we've got protozoa. Some of us have helminths, which I think are really cool. And that's a definitely understated part of the microbiome that we don't have to get into now, but I am a big fan of helminthic therapy as well. So I think about how do we diversify and make our microbiome as rich as possible so that all of those microorganisms can keep each other in check. Because when we're sending things down like antibiotics and antimicrobials, yeah, we might be killing the thing that we think is causing the problem, but I often like to challenge that idea and say maybe it's not that organism that is the problem. It's the fact that we haven't fed the other 999 organisms that are going to be keeping that organism in check. And so it's a big step back from our kill savvy approach to medicine.
Absolutely. And I was surprised when I came into naturopathic medicine is that it has still that tendency to, attack and kill antimicrobials, antiparasitics, even in the herbal world. And a lot of the naturopaths that have trained many years ago are still doing that approach, kill, rebuild, kill, rebuild, kill, rebuild. and it just doesn't work, you know. So there is that environmental component, and I really love what Kiran Krishnan has done with the spore based and the education surrounding the ability to change the environment. And I always will remember what he told me is that, you know, it's like the probiotics like putting a piece of blue sand onto a beach and expecting the whole beach to turn blue. And it won't. So you have to look after the beach. So,
Yes.
and it was so simple that just stuck with me. I'm like, yes, why are we not looking after the beach? Just as like, this is common sense. It's crazy. So I just love all of that. And I think, yes, the signaling molecules are something that is definitely understated. And also the fact that people don't realize that hormones and neurotransmitters, including the vitamins, like you said, are all produced, are all supported by. So if you don't have, if you know, oh, it's all separate to us. A lot of clients will say, you know, my hormones are out, nothing to do with my gut. And I'm like, well, maybe maybe we have to do some education here. So it's a beautiful thing, and I love the way that you describe the digestive system. You make it juicy and sexy, and where it is, and it needs to be expressed that way because it's such a huge component of our health. So,
Yeah.
yeah, talk to me a little bit more about neurotransmitters and hormones, and sort of lay that down, and then we can move into postbiotics and what you're doing in the field.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that you said that because I've been at a few different conferences where I've talked with doctors and I'm like, what do you know about fecal transplant? Like, tell me more. And they're like, "Ah, I work with hormones." And I'm like, so you work with the gut, right? Like, are you working with the gut? So I think the hormonal aspect of how the guts and hormones interact is a little bit less known. It's still a place that we're exploring and starting to understand more about it. But there's estrogen metabolism that happens strongly inside of the liver, right? So our breakdown of all kind or how we conjugate our hormones and get them out of the system, it's often happening through digestive processes. And so thinking about people who have like excess estrogen or excess progesterone, that's often a gut issue. Like there's a component there that has to be gut involved. And so there's that aspect. And then if we shift to neurotransmitters, I'm like at a point where I kind of feel like the gut is the first brain and the brain is the second brain, And it's like I work a lot in mental health. I love emotions and I love working with people through their emotions. I don't think depression is something that we need to clinically treat all of the time. I think people actually should be allowed to feel sad. And I think that it's an important component of human expression and how we live and interact in this world. And when we're constantly suppressing and being like, "Well, I can't feel sad because I need to perform," it's like, well, maybe you just don't need to perform this week so that you can actually process and feel the emotion and feel the grief. And, the people who've come to me that have been on, different antipsychotic medications for years on end, and then we start working on their gut, it's like, well, maybe I don't need these medications anymore. And it's like, yeah, maybe you don't, because serotonin, one of the biggest producers of serotonin comes from our gut. It comes from our gut microbes. We've got precursors to dopamine that come from the gut, right? When we talk about those postbiotic signaling molecules, dopamine's a fun, feel good neurotransmitter. I mean, a lot of people take drugs to get dopamine splurges, it's, ooh, get some dopamine in there, like take some LSD. Great. But, you can make dopamine from different precursors that are coming through the gut. And so as long as we've got those precursors coming through, I mean, I often think about Parkinson's. I think Parkinson's is a really good example of this, right? Because we know it ends up being a deficiency in dopamine later in life. What's really interesting is that they've been looking at Parkinson's patients and they see that their is usually preceded by 10 to 20 years of constipation. So these people are not having adequate digestion. They're not pooping every day. They're not having all of these detoxification compounds exit their body. And our body is like, our digestive tract is so resilient and smart. It's like, oh, there's something in there. Maybe I can like make use of it again. Maybe I can recycle it. Maybe I can bring it back into the environment. So if it's sitting in the tube too long, the body's going to try and figure out how to use it and how to make use of it because it's like, well, it's there, so I'm going to do something with it. And so I do think that there are so many components of how the microbiome interacts with our brain that there is a, I know they call them neurotransmitters, but I'm like, serotonin should be an enterotransmitter. It's like coming from the gut. Like all of these precursors are coming from the gut. They're talking to the brain and they're helping our central nervous system. But I mean, I give the gut a lot of credit. What can I say? I'm biased.
Pardon the interruption. Now, a word from one of our sponsors, Transcriptions. When it comes to boosting your cognitive edge, they're rewriting the script on brain health. And the signature Troche Just Blue is not just any supplement. With 16 milligrams of methylene blue, this little powerhouse is your ally for antioxidant power, mood elevation, more brain power, and sustained performance. So interested in giving your health and performance that extra advantage, visit transcriptions.com and explore their precision dose range. And here's a bonus for our listeners. Use the exclusive code POD10 to snatch a 10% discount off your purchase. Then elevate your well-being with transcriptions. Now let's get back to the show. No, but I think we need to really redefine. I think what gut work or what, I worked on my gut and it sort of didn't work. I hear a lot. And I think we need to sort of redefine what gut work or working on the gut or gut health is. And I think that it is a huge plethora of a component of different actions that we need to take or look at versus just slippery on or just a probiotic or just a sealer and healer for the mucosal lining. So there's so much more to it. And I think we'll get into that in a minute, but I want to go through with you. It's interesting when I was reading about transplants, obviously that's where you started and then you moved into postbiotics. So first up, I want to sort of get you to explain the difference between fecal transplant and crapsules.
I love it. I feel like both of them, I just want to be fair. I think both of them are crapsules. So, I'll just state that blanket statement out there, put it out there. But yeah, so fecal transplant, what's really cool about fecal transplant is we take stool. It is exactly what it sounds like. We take stool from a healthy donor, and health is a hard thing to define, but we can definitely go there if we want to. But you screen these healthy donors, right? So we do serum testing, we do stool testing, we do a full interview of them, we do a physical exam. It's like, cool, you're healthy. That's awesome. Then we take their stool, their Bristol 4 solid stool, and we process it into crapsules, right? So we make their stool into a swallowable pill. So it's oral delivery. That's what I've worked in. You can do colonoscopic delivery, you can do an NG tube. There's a lot of different ways to deliver fecal transplant. I think capsules are the best personally. There's no prep involved. It's pretty simple. You have to swallow 30 capsules in a 60-minute setting. That can be hard for some patients. So I can acknowledge that. But from all of the, like you said, not many people know about fecal transplant. I think one of the reasons people don't know much about it is because of the regulatory world that surrounds it. And in the United States specifically, which is where I'm practicing, you can only use it for C. diff not responding to standard therapy. And that means in the technical not responding to standard therapy means they've at least failed 2 rounds of antibiotic therapy before they can qualify for fecal transplant. And so, those are a very small niche group of people who end up qualifying. But like you said, through NIH grants, through different clinical trials, we've been able to see fecal transplant help with things like multiple sclerosis, help with things like graft versus host disease, help with, hepatic encephalopathy, which is like end stage liver disease, right? And we think about it for metabolic syndrome. Like I'm doing a talk for cardiometabolic health coming up and looking at potentials for reducing insulin or potentials for reducing BMI. Doesn't always pan out in the human world. In mouse and rat models, they've been able to show some really cool changes in like body habitus, but doesn't always work in the human world. But we have all of these potential options for it. And being somebody who's owned a stool bank, I think one of the most profound moments in practice was in 2019. There was a research trial that came out of Arizona State University, and it was a 2-year follow-up to a trial they had conducted in 2017 on 18 kiddos with moderate to severe autism spectrum disorder, so ASD. And they took these kids and they did all of these kind of like psychological screenings on them. They did the CARS, which is basically the childhood autism rating scale, right? So they gave them a rating, they qualified them. They basically were like, you are kids with autism spectrum disorder. And from there, they also did a GI symptom scale. And then they dosed them with fecal transplant. And so they gave them a large bolus dose, so like a starter dose. And that was generally through enema delivery. Some of them took it through like a powdered, a live freeze dried powder. And then the following weeks that occurred for the trial, which were 8 to 10 more weeks, they gave more of this powdered fecal transplant to these kids on their food in a lower dose, so more of a therapeutic dosing strategy. And what was really cool is at the end of those 10 weeks, they saw significant improvements in the behavioral scales and in the GI symptom scales for these kids. Fast forward to 2019, they took those same 18 kids without introducing any more therapy, and they reassessed all of the scales. And not only was there sustained improvement, there was actually continuation of improvement along the way. That week, when that study published, my clinic phone rang off the hook. And we had parents who had kids with autism spectrum disorder who were like, how do we get this? How do we get fecal transplant? Like, we saw the research, we want this. You guys have a bank. How do we get this? And it was like one of the worst times ever to be a doctor because you're like, cool, I'm reading the same research you are. I can hear the desperation in your voice. I have therapy in the freezer, and I have to say no because regulation tells me I can't treat you. Um, and that was really heartbreaking. Me and my business partner, Andrea Macbeth, at the time, we were both just like, this is brutal. And we ended up meeting with a couple of advocate groups who worked with kids with autism spectrum disorder. And they were like, one of the advocates himself, he's written a bunch of books. His name is JB Hanley. But we met with him and he was like, you guys have to understand that parents who have kids with autism spectrum disorder, their drug is hope. It's hope
Mm,
that their kids will have a normal life, that maybe they'll find love someday. Maybe they can live on their own independently. They can hold their own job. They're going to be people who can just live a moderate life. And it was like heartbreaking because we were like, yeah, we want to help make that happen and we can't, right? And so basically, from that point forward, we had had some conversations kind of off the cuff with a FDA regulator at one point where we had asked the question, if we sterilize fecal transplant, do you still consider it fecal transplant? And the answer from the FDA was no. And so we were like, sweet, that's fantastic. Because what we wanted to do was we wanted to see if we sterilized the stool and we killed all of the living organisms, would there be something left over that would still confer benefit for our patient population? And so what we did was just that. We applied for all these incubator groups. We tried to get funding so we could get a freeze dryer. We ended up meeting, we called her our fairy godmother, but we met this woman who was part of an incubator group that had actually denied us, but she found our application in a pile of applications and she reached out and she was just like, what are you guys doing? Like, let's talk. And so she did kind of a whiteboard session with us and she wrote us a check so we could do a research trial on our powder and we could buy a freeze dryer to make the powder. So it was really cool, and it kind of sprung us into this new path of like what does exist when the microbes are all gone, what's left over. And it really was that understated part of the microbiome, which was the postbiotics. And we ran a really cool assay. It was an untargeted metabolomics assay, which is a really big fancy word for basically saying they took a gas chromatography instrument and they ran our powder through it. And when they ran the powder through, the big question was, what's there? Like, what exists? And what's cool about gas chromatography is that you get a graph readout with peaks, and each peak indicates an individual something that's there, right? And in this case, it's individual metabolites and or postbiotics. That word gets used interchangeably a lot. So I'll say them, but I mean the same thing when I'm saying postbiotic and metabolite. So what we saw on the GCMS readout was over 1,000 unique peaks. So even though we had processed this powder, we had taken stool, we had pulverized it essentially in a blender. And then we freeze dried it we sterilized it, then freeze dried it. And we took samples each step along the way to be like, okay, here's raw stool. This is what it looks like to make a fecal transplant pellet. This is what it looks like to sterilize that fecal transplant pellet. This is what it looks like to take that sterilized fecal transplant pellet and freeze dry it. Right. So there's all these different arms. But what was really cool is that all along the way, it really didn't matter how we touched the stool. These postbiotic molecules were really stable and they stuck around in the milieu. Right. And so it was really fun because Metabolon themselves, which is the company we ran this assay through, they actually had a library of about 800 metabolites. So they didn't even have enough names to tell us what all existed in our product. And so there was a period in time where we were like, it's the dark matter. We like joke it was the dark matter, but people are like, hey, that's kind of weird. So we call it uncharacterized now because that's, a better way to present the data. But yeah, we've got, over 1,000 unique signaling molecules that are coming from microbiomes of people that we've determined to be healthy. And what's really cool is that if you can take the signal, which these postbiotics essentially are, right? It's how they speak to the microbiome. So, or how they speak to the body from the microbiome. So if we can take this signal from somebody who's healthy and we can put it into a capsule or a crapsule and we give it to somebody who's not so healthy, they're missing parts of that signal. They're missing parts of that message from a healthy biome. And suddenly we can replace that message. We can show their body like, hey, this is what it feels like to be healthy. Do you want to come along? And I kind of think of it like that, right? Like, this is what it feels like. Do you want to keep living in that direction or do you want to come this way? Do you want to keep coming this way? And what's really cool is like my patients, I have my own personal clinical practice, right? So I see patients through my private practice. And I see a lot of people with food intolerances. I see a lot of people with IBD. I see a lot of people with autoimmune conditions and mental health conditions. And it's so interesting because I don't know what compound in that product does it for these different patients, but the ones that respond, man, they'll come in and be like, what did you give me? And you're like, it was a really complex compound, but one of those things or three of those things or the whole group together and how it works as an ecosystem clearly gave you a signal that you've been lacking.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. I have so many questions, but let's start. So, obviously, when we're looking at fecal transplant versus this, what's the timing difference? Well, what's the sort of treatment? Obviously, you're taking a short period of time, multiple capsules for the transplant, the fecal transplant. When you're doing the postbiotics, how long is sort of treatment that, what does that look like? And I know you say, so what you're saying is sort of, it's a bridge, so it gets them to feel what it feels like to be healthy again. So you're then enabling them to make and feel like they need to be making more changes in their life, in their diet, in their fiber, in their diversity, so they can then step into that easier. And I love that because we have to use a bridge sometimes to get people just to see the light at the end. So what sort of a treatment difference is there as well?
That's a really good question. It's a complex answer. So I would say that fecal transplant, when we're just looking at fecal transplant for C. diff, that's a pretty overnight shift and change. When we're looking at fecal transplant for things like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, they like to do what they call more of a long-term dosing strategy or a therapeutic dosing strategy. And so they'll dose, kind of like what they did in the autism spectrum disorder trial. They'll dose every single week for 4 to 8 weeks or something like that, where it's continuous repetition, frequency becomes important. But in terms of stickability, which I like lacking a better term for it than that, but when you're looking at fecal transplant, live fecal transplant, and you're redose, and you look at the biome of the person before they received the fecal transplant to after when they've received it for however many weeks, their biome starts to look more like their donor's biome than it did their original biome. And that can sustain. Sometimes that can sustain for, I think the longest trial I remember reading was 3.8 years. And it's like, that's cool. But it doesn't always stick like that in the long run. I've had many patients who do DIY fecal transplant at home and they'll get relief for 6 to 8 months and then their symptoms return and they need to figure out another way. So they need to either redose again or they need to do more of a continuous dosing strategy. So hard to say because fecal transplant, so much of what we know is around the C. diff world, and that's like such a one and done, and it feels like a miracle panacea. So there's that complex aspect of fecal transplant where it's like, yes, and, right? Like it's like, yes, it can be a miracle overnight. And oftentimes there is a need to do more of a therapeutic dosing strategy. With the sterilized product, what's really cool about it is I kind of think of it like a probiotic. Patients take one capsule a night, maybe two capsules a night. If they're in the IBD world, I've had some take four capsules a night, you know? And what's really interesting is that I've had some patients who have taken a single bottle and they came into me, you know, my very first patient I ever and treated this or used this as an option for his bloating. He came in, he'd been experiencing bloating after meals for about 20 years. And he was kind of your classic SIBO picture, right? Like he would go have breakfast at a restaurant. He'd sit back and have to unbutton his pants because he started bloating so much his pants didn't fit anymore, you know? So, and he was like, I'm an older man, I'm buttoning my pants in a restaurant. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I get that. That's not great, right? So, he took one bottle's worth. So he took one capsule a day for 30 days and his bloating went away, like totally resolved. Super cool. He didn't need any more of that. That is a very rare experience in my time now using this product. So we launched it. The first person to use it was him in 2020. Now it's 2024. So I've had 4 years under my belt of trying this product. And what's really interesting is what I see is generally patients, if they're going to get a relief, they're going to feel that within the first 1 to 2 months. So they're going to know, like, oh, interesting, something shifted. You know, like I had one patient who was a celiac patient, and again, this is any patients I talk about are in my private practice. So it's just to separate the company from me and my private practice. But um, you know, she had come in and she had started taking the product and she told me, she was like, you know, I started this product, my poops almost instantly got better. She's like, but what was really crazy is about a month in, I realized that I didn't have a pain in my abdomen that I didn't even realize that I had been having in my abdomen because it'd been there for so long that now that it's gone, she's like, I just like, I didn't even know that I had had that. And now that it's gone, it's like, holy cow, this is incredible, you know? So I've heard stories like that for sure. And for those patients, you know, they're going to notice that difference. What can happen though is they'll take it and they'll start to get all these beautiful benefits and they're like, cool, I'm good. Like it changed everything. I'm good to go. But like we said, it's a signal, right? So we're bringing that signal in. And yes, it's a signal and it's a fuel source. So I think of this as like compost for the internal soil because there's the signal that's being delivered to the body, absolutely. But some of these postbiotics are also fuel sources for other microbes inside of the community. So things like lactate or acetate or succinate, like these small molecules are actually food particulate for other microbes inside of the microbiome. So when I'm using this with patients, if they're amicable to it, I will have them do I run Nirvana biome testing on them because it gives me a diversity score. So I can do an alpha diversity and a beta diversity. And that's really what I'm looking at when I'm looking at patients' labs. Like, again, so many convoluted things about the microbes themselves, like horizontal gene transfer, where they can switch off which genes or like who's making what. It gets complex and complicated. But I think that instead of focusing on the bug, I want to focus on the community of bugs inside of my patient's microbiome. And so if I can show diversity increasing, which for the handful of patients that have let me do that, I have seen diversity increase, which has been so cool because I'm like, yes, we're bridging, we're giving that palliative aspect, we're giving people the ability to feel better, to have more energy, to see what it feels like to have this healthy biome, while we're also feeding their internal biome and teaching them the lifestyle things they need to do to continue that biome. And so that takes time, you know? So I'm usually looking at anywhere from, you know, 6 to 12 months of a patient being on the sterilized product. And at that time, you know, if they're feeling good and they've been feeling good for a few months, I'll try and get them off. And if they're not ready, what'll happen is usually they'll go a couple of weeks and then they'll be like, you know, this symptom's starting to come back, or this is starting to return, or what do you think about this? And then I'm like, okay, maybe we need to get you back on it for maybe a lower dose option. So maybe it's like every other day, or maybe it's once a week, or something like that to help support that biome while we continue to work through the lifestyle aspects that are going to ultimately keep that biome happy and healthy, right? Like we know sauerkraut is like one of the best things you can eat, kimchi, like fermented foods. If you can get your patient to a point where they're eating fermented foods, you're rock star status. Like you're doing great. That's fantastic. I love that, you know? So I generally am working in that kind of under that premise with my patients where it's like, cool, you're here, your microbiome's really degraded because they come to me with like 100 use antibiotic history, where it's like, oh, I took them like candy when I was a kid, like the pink amoxicillin that kids used to get when they had strep or when they had, the pink antibiotic that would come in the sweet tasting jar, right? Like everyone had that as a kid. It was like totally normal. You would go have your sweet treat and but it was constant and all the time, and then you meet women who've had UTIs all through college, and they were treated with antibiotics all through college, now their gut's a mess, and their mental health is a mess, and it's like, if we can start rebuilding that biome, rebuilding that community through some of these signaling molecules that are helping actually support the internal community, while also talking to the body, it's like such a win-win.
Absolutely. And I think the win is also that they get the motivation, like I said before. It's about they feel something. So the problem, as you said right at the start, is naturopathic medicine takes a long time. And it takes patience and it takes belief and it takes, trust in the practitioner. So if they're feeling something so quickly or so dramatic initially, even with the education that you can give them, that it's not a permanent change. It's something that you need to be making with the lifestyle changes as well, but at least they can see that and that pushes them towards making more change and putting more effort in. And I think that's a huge, a massive strain, I think, when you have a patient is actually getting them to make those changes and having that belief in it. And if you win that, you win the whole scenario, I believe. It's one of the biggest bridges to cross. Yeah. So I want to follow on, and it was a perfect segue from how to look after your microbiome. And then at the end, I'm going to jump into, your 3 smarter, not harder ways for the microbiome to live healthy. But I want you just to run me through your, non-negotiable microbiome care for everyone. How do we best, and I know you speak a lot about diversity, and what happens when we have less diversity, and multiple things come to mind when I think about that, diet restriction, carnivore, keto, all these things where we're actually cutting things out for, maybe a short period of time is good, but forever, maybe not ideal. So let's explore that a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. I love that. My non-negotiables. This might shock some people, but non-negotiables are actually like they're the things we think about in naturopathic medicine that are all about self-care, right? So getting a good night of sleep. Like we need a good night of sleep to support our microbiome. We need to be moving our body every day to support our microbiome. That doesn't mean you have to be a CrossFitter who's going out and like lifting tires and like flipping tires on the street. You can go for a walk. And that is like totally a reasonable way to help support the microbiome because it's pumping things, right? It's moving things around in our body. It's helping blood circulation. A lot of these postbiotics are getting into the bloodstream. We need them to be circulated so that they can go to the different tissue sites that they need to go to. Being hydrated is like such an understated, important aspect of health. Like, I'm just like, it's one of my first questions I ask on any intake. I'm like, how much water are you drinking? And people are like, I drink enough. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, give me ounces, give me sizes. Like, what does that mean? And then they'll be like, well, I drink like a good glass in the morning. And then, I'll probably have one in the afternoon too. And, if I'm really thirsty, I might have another glass at night. And I'm like, you are so dehydrated. Like you need more water, our stool requires moisture to exit the bowel. Like we need water to help stool pass through the bowel. And if we have stool sitting in the bowel for too long, that's not supportive of our microbiome, so I think about those aspects as well. And then in terms of diet, like, the American Gut Project diet is like the most obvious. That's why I go to it last because I'm like, there's other really important things that we can't forget about. But diet's super important because what's really, really interesting about the American Gut Project when they were kind of trying to figure out like what constitutes health, what means health in a healthy body, healthy diet, they were looking at, different diversity in the diet itself, right? So like you talked about the carnivore diet. I know the carnivore diet is like so hot right now and everyone loves it. And I think it's great. Like I'm a big fan of meat. I grew up in a hunting family, so like, venison and elk were things that I got to eat a lot when I was younger. And I love liver. So I'm like, if you're going to eat meat, like eat the organ meats for sure, because they're so nutrient dense and they're so rich in all kinds of different vitamins and minerals that are so easily assimilated by our body. So it's not that I'm anti meat. It's just that there are bugs inside of our system that really, really depend on and thrive on polyphenolic compounds. And what I mean by that is that those are the colorful things that come on our fruits and vegetables, right? So it's the skins, when people say eat your rainbow, you're getting all of those different compounds from those different plant materials. And I think what's really important about that is that that's helping to feed different types of microbes inside of the environment. So, all of the different types of foods you can get into the diet, the better. Not everybody can do that, though. Not everybody can tolerate a massive, diverse array of vegetables. Like, if I have a Crohn's patient that I'm like, hey, like, you should start eating the rainbow and you should go eat a salad with all these chopped up veggies, like, I'm going to explode their gut. Like, I'm going to absolutely blow them up from the inside. I don't wanna do that to somebody, right? Like, that's not my goal. I don't want them to hate me and then never come back to me, because then I really can't help them, you know? So, it's like, okay, what can we start with? Like, maybe if you're somebody who's not eating a lot of plants right now, like, maybe sautéing down, like, a couple of different greens to add to your meal, right? It's like baby steps. It's like, okay, one meal, maybe you add a little bit of broccoli. It doesn't have to be massively diverse all of the time. You don't have to eat this incredible, colorful salad all the time. But what the American Gut Project told us is like, if you're eating 30 different plant based foods in a week, and that includes spices. So, like, add some turmeric to something, add some paprika to something. Do you like, if you like celery root, or if you like something like, I'm like blanking on all my spices right now, but like you can add spice to basically anything. And every time you add a new spice, add that to your list of 30. If you're going to drink tea, right? You're getting the polyphenolic compounds. It's maybe not in the same fibrous, like harsh, hardy material that you would get. And if you were eating the actual food or eating the actual bark, but you're still getting those compounds in through the tea. So when you're drinking like different root teas and you've got like a 5 blend root tea, cool, you've got 5 different products you just brought into the system. That's diversifying. You can diversify through tea. And that's one thing that I really like to stress with my patients who are like super hardcore, like, I just got to do the carnivore. And I'm like, cool. Can you like get some herbal teas in there too? Just like a few, just like enough to, like, you're still not eating those things, but at least you're getting some of the signals and some of the different compounds that our microbes really thrive off of. And so I think about that too. And then I also like, if they're like super hardcore, I'll have them like, I have some patients where, one woman I had just a couple weeks ago, she was like, I'm really good on like a very simple diet. I eat the exact same thing every day. I feel really good when I eat the exact same thing every day. And I was like, cool. I'm not gonna change that because you feel good doing that. Can you just add maybe a tablespoon of sauerkraut? Like, that's it. I just want you to add. I'm not gonna have you take anything away, but if you can add just a little bit of sauerkraut or kimchi and add something that has some of those fibrous materials, but it's also a ferment, right? Like, when we talk about, like, our ancestors ate fermented vegetables all the freaking time because it was one of the best ways for us to preserve food. And it's a great way for us to have exposure to soil microbes, right? So when you're talking about Kieran, like, love that man on a level. What a wonderful human he is, right? But it's like so much of what we're learning about like spore-based and spore-forming microbes, a lot of them are soil microbes, right? And so a lot of them are coming from the ground. We've missed that. Like, we've got pesticides all over, and I'm not sure what the Australian world looks like in terms of pesticides, but I can tell you the American world is not beautiful,
We are the same.
right? And so it's like we're actively killing these organisms that want to help us. And so I'm constantly trying to get patients away from conventional farming, away from pesticide laden foods. And sometimes that's not affordable, and I get that. But like, it is, to me, it is such a, like, humanitarian issue that we have so many pesticides sprayed everywhere, because that's a major, major microbiome disruptor. And I think that I've had patients who were autoimmune patients where once they made that switch to more of an organic based diet, that alone was enough to make them feel better. And so there are components of our agricultural system that we're fighting against all the time. But I do think that, baby steps, like considering baby steps with the diet, you don't have to be perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect. Like there are times where I'll go meet with friends and we'll hang out and then it's like, "Oh, shoot, like time has passed. Let's go find a place that's open for dinner." And the only thing that's open is like a place that you're like, "Okay, this is probably not the food I would eat every single day of my life." And it's okay to live the 80-20 rule where like 80% of the time you're good, you're solid, you're doing everything right, you're eating at home, you're cooking your own food. And the other 20% of the time is made for moments like that where it's like, it doesn't matter. I've got the freedom to like go out and go eat the nachos. Like, why not? And bless your food. Like, hope that it's gonna give you all the nourishment it can in that moment and, get back on track when you get home. So, um, I hope that answers your question, but those are kinda like it's a long-winded list of non-negotiables, but there's a lot, and it's really about being empowered to take care of yourself.
Right, the interruption again. This segment is proudly sponsored by Home Gut Immune Module. Designed for health practitioners, this module dives into the critical relationship between gut and immune health, offering advanced strategies for looking at and addressing gut related health issues. So, this module, what does it bring to you? Maldigestion, inflammation, dysbiosis, and metabolic imbalance, infection, food sensitivities, and all the information you need to look in depth into the gut and immune system. Right on track for this episode. We know how important the microbiome and the interaction it has with the whole body. So, led by industry experts, this module blends scientific theory with practical case studies and ensuring you can apply your knowledge directly. So, enhancing your practice with Homeworks insights into gut immune health. Visit homefolk.org to discover how this module can benefit you and your clients. Yeah, yeah, and I totally agree. And I think it's good for people because it's sort of like there's not that limitation of I can never do. And when you put a never do in, then you end up being a rebel in your own right. And you sort of like, splurge on the side more often than you should. So if you put in a I can and then wow, I'm going to look after my body for the rest of the time, then there's so much more leeway and freedom in that they feel that they can actually live their life still. And I find that's the biggest thing when you're treating patients is that or clients that they always come in and they go, please don't take my coffee away from me, or please don't take my wine away from me. I'm like, well, no, we won't, but you just make some other little add-ons. And then it's always a nice thing when they go, oh wow, she didn't make me, naughty school teacher type, feeling. So I think it's beautiful to be able to have that with the client. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. So I wanted and it sort of comes into this, and I think you've already answered the question, but what are your recommendations for people? Because we always ask this at the end of every podcast for how you live smarter, not harder for your microbiome. So 3 or 4 things that you want to really finish on.
Oh man, work smarter, not harder. I mean, prioritize sleep if you can. I like sleep, 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 sleep because so much of that interacts with how our nervous system responds. And a lot of my patients, again, I'm working in the gut a lot. So I'm doing a lot of gut work. I can't treat the gut without treating the nervous system. Like it doesn't, those two to me go hand in hand. And so sleep is one of the number one ways for me to at least start getting more stability inside of the nervous system. And, they talk about the brain shrinking at night and the gliolymphatics, like picking up all the excess garbage and like cleaning it out. Like we need a good sleep to clean out the brain. So there's that, like sleep forever, hydration. I like I'm gonna go back to hydration because I think it's so important. And then like not feeling guilty for, like you said, the I can moments, right? Like I have so many patients, especially in the realm of metabolic syndrome or diabetes, where it's like, well, I couldn't have that piece of cake. And it's like, you can tell that they're thinking about it weeks after not having it. And it's like, if you had just had like a bite or two and like actually splurged a little bit, and then the next day you really like stood up, decided to take a little bit more of an empowered approach to your diet, and you really like hit it hard with the vegetables if you could, that's awesome. Like, don't guilt trip yourself and don't like don't bully yourself, right? Like I think we're in it's kind of a toxic culture of like, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that. And I had a therapist once who was like, stop shooting all over yourself. And I was like, I like that. I like that a lot, like, you're right, like, there are things that you can do, and as long as you're making the conscious decision, right? It's like, like, I'm really craving that today, and if you don't eat the thing you're craving, then, like, sometimes that craving becomes that midnight snack that people are, like, going to the fridge to, like, overeat on because it's like they didn't do it in the moment, and so now they need it, right? It, like, becomes this, like, obsession, and so it's like, yeah, go feed the need, and then get back to that 80% of the time where you're doing things the way that you
Yeah.
need to be doing. So, I think again, I work a lot in the realm of emotions and beliefs, and so it's like you've really you've
I
gotta
love
know you have the ability to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't separate health and emotion. They are one and the same, and one feeds off the other. So, and I think we forget that. And that's a really important point. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's either this has been an absolute experience. Thank you for talking all the good shit with me. Had to spit that one in. And tell us where we can find all about you. And I also wanted to ask, do you have is Thaena products available in Australia?
Not right now, not currently. So Thana Biotic is our product. It is currently only available inside the United States. So hopefully someday we are applying for our patent recognition in Australia and in Canada and likely the EU soon. So hopefully we'll go international in a time frame where this will publish and you'll be like, hey, I actually do have, access to Thanabiotic, but not currently. But where people can find me, so Thana is the name of our company. So we've got an Instagram, Thana.inc. So THAENA.inc is our Instagram handle. Me personally, it's Dr. Piper Dobner. So Instagram, it's dr.piperdobner. And you can find me there, or my medical clinic is Flora Medicine. So that's where I see patients privately. And I also have an Instagram there. So look up all those names. You'll find all of those places. Yeah, I think my biggest passion with working with patients is to really empower them to know that they can take charge of their health and that you're never stuck. And I really believe that all of us have the incredible potential and ability to heal because our bodies want that for us and our microbes want it for us. And so just figuring out how and where and when works best for the individual sitting in front of us is the most important part. So I just really appreciate you inviting me on. Thank you so much, Jodi. This has been like such a fun conversation and I love talking shit with you. You can come, we can talk shit any day. I'm happy to do that.
I would definitely love that. We'd have to catch up again. I think so much of what you've been saying is how I practice, and I just so many yeses from my side, and I love the work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to chat with you.
That wraps up a very enriching episode on the Smarter Not Harder podcast. Big thank you to Piper for joining us and sharing all of her invaluable insights into the vast universe of the microbiome and all things shit, and the pioneering work that she is doing in the field. So to our listeners, we hope today's discussion has illuminated the complexities and potential of postbiotics and the human microbiome. And your curiosity fuels our mission to unravel those $64,000 questions with 1 cent solutions. So remember to leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy the content, and it greatly supports our work. So thank you. Keep fostering that curiosity, embrace that learning journey, and join us next time for more thought-provoking discussions here at the Smarter Not Harder podcast. And until then, take care and continue your amazing work in this health field.